All right, the last preparations for the ANC conference being finalised. We're just 2 days away from this week's landmark ruling in the North Gauteng High Court, rejecting President Jacob Zuma's challenge of the state capture report and ordering the president to pay his own legal costs to the recent provincial elective conference court matters, one in the Free State, vote buying claims, tribalism comments and preferred candidates being openly spoken about. What can we expect? Earlier we spoke to Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, who gave his views on state capture.
Of state capture really only became so much more evident much later. And people always say, I mean, didn't you know what was happening in Eskom? And frankly, we didn't, because Eskom was supposed to be running well. It was building 3 power stations, almost all at one go, and it was when we started having load shedding, and then when the war room was set up, and then we started asking questions, that we started picking up that things may not be as well as they should, and that's when the 3 or so executives were then suspended, and then a lot of things started coming out. And it was through the emails as well that a lot of these shenanigans then spilled out into the open, that nearly everyone then became more fully aware. Media people have been saying, well, we were reporting, we were saying this, but I also say, yes, you were reporting, but the full extent of it all was not so evident.
DP, this scares me because you have a deployed minister who's the shareholder on the taxpayers' behalf.
Yes.
And the minister's job is to make sure that these things don't happen.
Yes.
That's all they do all day.
The minister has oversight. The minister has oversight, and oversight means that they will look at sort of governance issues, and they never really go into the entrails, into the deeper workings of the organization, and the board is supposed to also play a particular role. But be that as it may, we now know. And now that this has all spilled out into the open, action is now going to be taken, and it is being taken. Parliamentary committees are working on it. Now the Commission of Inquiry.
Right, so that was a conversation that I had with the Deputy President of the country, as well as of the African National Congress, hopeful to be promoted from Deputy to President of the party, and perhaps that will follow, that he'll become President of the party if his party does win an election in the future. But to unpack some of what he said, and perhaps the impression that he may have left on some delegates who might have been watching, is political analyst. They join me in studio right now, as we say. Good evening to Melanie Fufuet. Thank you very much for joining us. And Tapelo Tselapedi, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
All right, so let me start with you, Tapelo. Your impressions listening to Cyril Ramaphosa. Delegates are busy making up their minds. Viewers at home are thinking, you know, if in the future this guy is the president of the ANC, might I vote for this party?
Look, my first impression at least is that he's consolidated himself as a person who's going to bring stability to the ANC first, and then going to bring stability to government as well. But the other thought that ran through my mind was that perhaps when you look at the policies of the ANC and when you look at what you are saying, the ANC is sort of where it was again in the early 90s, where there was a lot of radical talk with regards to intervention on the economy. But then 1996 came and Gear had to come here to stabilize South African society, government and so forth. It seems that's where the ANC is, and I think he's running on the ticket that he may be able to stabilize both government and the ANC.
All right, Melanie, your thoughts listening to Deputy President speaking?
Look, it was vintage Cyril Ramaphosa. It was the conciliatory, it was Mr. Gudesa. You know, he was speaking both as the Deputy President of the country, but also of the ANC, and talking, you know, very much the unity ticket, you know, everything's under control, acknowledging mistakes, but you know, doing a very good exercise of trying to show, you know, that we are moving forward as the ANC. The risk, of course, always is that he sounds a little bit evasive at times when it comes to the really hardcore issues. And it's something that he's been criticized for a lot during his campaign as well, you know, and a frustration from many people who feel, and particularly in the business community, just come out and say things, you know. And I think that's, we heard a little bit of that again tonight. Of course, it is on the eve of the conference, so he doesn't want to make mistakes. We don't want another quasi kind of thing happening. So, and he didn't make mistakes, but the difficulty is always that it can be a bit evasive, and I think we've seen some of that. So did it come across
like a campaign, you know, chat, that he was busy still trying to sell himself to people who might be watching?
No, definitely. My impression again was that it was a bit sanitized. I think, you know, what Chet also, you know, what Melanie was talking about, that, you know, it was couched around unity talk, that the ANC can still, you know, self-correct, and that let's wait for the elective conference for the ANC to self-correct. But I think the deep issues that he did not talk about, again, he was a bit obfuscating in the sense that he did not quite pinpoint what are the issues that he particularly himself had asked. What could he have done differently when he was in government and so forth? So I think those issues he could have touched on a little bit much more.
I mean, he certainly spoke at times, and you could hear as the deputy president, you know, and he was addressing issues and policy to some extent, and so. But then at times you could hear he was also conscious that he is running a campaign. So the whole thing about renewing our vows in the ANC, which is very, very sort of poetic language, you know, and we are friends. We don't have to be friends, but we are comrades. You know, that's definitely for the delegates out there. That's more so than for the audience.
The clip we showed just before was on state capture, and he said, look, now we know what the problem is, we can fix it. Will people buy into that? Because it seems to me like they were there, they saw, it's either they couldn't or they wouldn't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I got a couple of texts from business people. I asked, "What are you thinking?" And the one thing that they did say was they were not convinced about the answer on the SOEs. I mean, this is certainly from a business perspective. That's the one thing that bothers them incredibly. Not the only thing, but certainly one of the big issues in the business community and investment community is the state of the SOEs. And, you know, I'm not convinced that saying, yeah, but the minister can never be involved in the detail and so on. That's, again, sort of trying to, you know, appease both sides. And I think at this stage, what we need to say is very forcefully, too many mistakes have been made, big mistakes, and this is how we fix it. But like the MTBBS issue, not really enough of how we fix it, in my view.
Let's listen to what he thought about corruption as well, and we'll get your take on that.
We've got to have an overarching type of approach. I mean, what has happened in Steinhoff is deplorable. It is, you know, a system that has really gone horribly, horribly wrong. We should never have had a situation like that where greed becomes the key driver of what people want to do and benefit from. And corruption has always been seen as a public sector type of problem. But now we can see that in the private sector, corruption is quite rife. And we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg with Steinhoff. And that is where we say those who are involved in Steinhoff, much as it may look like it's a private company, its operations, its business, you know, impacts on a lot of people. There must be investigation, there must be arrests, and there must be jail time for people who are perpetrating these acts, because they impact on the lives of government employees, pensioners, and indeed the public. So our task as a regulator, which is government, is to make sure that we protect the public, we protect the people of South Africa. It is deplorable. And this is what then feeds into this notion about South Africa, that this corruption is so rife, but it's always been seen like it's only in the state, and yet it is in the private sector as well.
You've sat on both sides of this,
yes.
Public sector, private sector. Are there conversations taking place to talk about things like corruption? Because for people at home, we watch and we just hear stories about corruption on both sides of the equation. How do we deal with it?
The main focus has always been in government. That, you know, when people look at us in government, they always say, oh, they are a corrupt bunch of people. We've never really focused on corruption that takes place in the private sector. The Chief Justice the other day at the university was saying, we never hear about corruption in the private sector and what happens to those who are caught. And we are saying there must be equal treatment. And the media must focus on both. We must be able to, you know, reveal everything that's happening, because it is when we reveal what is happening that we are then able to correct the challenges and the problems that are there. You talk about
jail time, private sector.
Yes.
Are we going to see the same in the public sector? Because the perception again is that the higher up you are in the food chain,
yes,
the less likely it is that you will go to jail. We see people are saying there's this lethargy by the authorities to go after people that are specifically named in things like the Gupta emails.
Yeah, and my take is, you know, we have got a constitution, the best constitution in the world, people say, which has an important value, which is rule of law. There must be rule of law. And rule of law means that those who have done wrong against the people of South Africa must be followed up without fear or favor or prejudice. They must be taken to book. They must be accountable. They must be responsible for the things that they have done wrong. Because when you do something wrong and you do it intentionally against the people of the country, for me, that is almost like treason, because you're acting against the interests of the public. So you must be followed up. And therefore, that's why I've been saying the justice system must follow
but you don't
all those who are responsible.
Okay, Tavelo, discuss for 10 marks.
Look, I think it's important that you mention the issue of private sector. I think for a long time there has been quite a focus, and I think the public narrative has always been that government is the one that's corrupt and so forth. And I think it's quite important to then focus on private sector, particularly with some of the work that the Competition Commission is doing as well. And so then how do you then deal with the issue of Steenhoff and so on and so forth? That's important. But part of my problem, again, I think the ANC is quite ahead with the sort of policy intervention it wants to make in the political economy. You don't want to, obviously I think part of the problem is that government is not stabilized. There's a lot of issues with corruption, a lot of issues with parastatals, and I think his message resonates given the fact that he's going to deal with a lot of these issues. But I think where the ANC is, it wants to deal with issues of what's going to happen with the mandate of the Reserve Bank around issues of also ownership. What's going to happen also with the issue of a state bank? How does the government intervene in that sense? And he's not talking to those issues. Perhaps it may be, again, when he talks around issues of rule of law, maybe an issue of making certain policies of the ANC priority when he goes into government, obviously. But I think that may be a problem with a certain constituency inside the ANC. But we'll see. Again, I think he spoke in a sanitized way, rule of law, constitutionalism, and so forth. And I think that's a mammoth task.
Until big fish go to jail, they're not going to win this convincing people, are they?
No, and this is the problem for him in terms of the ANC election in the next few days. He's always been strong on corruption, strong on anti-corruption, strong about attacking that. But I'm not sure how that plays with ordinary delegates, not because they want to be corrupt, but just because really, is that really their priority at this stage? Whereas in DZ, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has spoken a lot more about basic issues. So part of the problem is, and also of course, that there are a lot of people in the opposing camp which know that they might go to jail if he becomes president. And the more he speaks like that, the higher the stakes go. Also now that we've had a court judgment that says the NPA, head of the NPA is going to be appointed by the deputy president. So if he stays, they know there's a much bigger risk for them. What was interesting for me, I think you answered the Steinhoff question well. I think he's strong on that. He's always been strong on that. What I also think he was doing is that he was trying to put a little bit, not only in that answer, but in some of the other answers, a little bit of daylight between him and big capital, because of course that's the one thing that he's been criticized for by the Dlamini Zuma camp, is that he is part of monopoly capital, or that is part of big capital, certainly of big money, nobody can deny that, and also of course that his camp has been very sort of anti the idea of white monopoly capital, against monopoly capital but not white. So he's been trying to push back a little bit against that, and I think this was giving him the excellent opportunity to try and do that. Look, whether it will really help, I don't know, but that was what I think he was also trying to do there.
It sounded like he gave up Naledi Pandor.
Yes.
But you'll remember that the ANC had obviously released a statement through Garamantashe saying that, well, let's not push slates, given that you're also contesting, let the branches decide effectively. And I think that was the tone he also took here, saying that effectively, you know, he may have had a candidate, but let the branches decide, particularly than the delegates. And I think that was obviously a safe bet for him to, or safe, you know, route for him to take.
So what does that mean?
But interestingly enough, just as we walked into the studio, I saw on my phone that they have just broken the news that in fact the two of them have released a joint statement. It must have happened while you were doing the interview, which said that they are now going to work together on the basis of the branches. It's exactly that kind of language. I think the story broke a little bit earlier than it was supposed to break.
It's Lindiwe Sisulu.
Zulu, yes, that she is now joining up. So I don't know if he went down on his knee or not, but clearly they are joining. I mean, the Naledi Pandor thing, of course, let's acknowledge she is incredibly competent, and you know, she is, as far as we know, completely clean of any form of corruption, and that's most probably why he brought her on. But to me, it felt a little bit like an own goal that he scored there. I have great respect for her, but the fact that he announced the slate from the stage, it wasn't his campaign team. There is an NDZ slate as well, but that's of course released by her team, not by her herself, and he did it from a stage, so that was frowned upon very much. And then the question, where did Naledi Pandor suddenly come from? And so, you know, that I always felt, like I said, was a bit of an own goal. Now they seem to have readjusted, you know, and so on. But of course, we will have to see what happens, right? Because Mabuza has got more than double the vote than Lindiwe Sisulu and Mkhize together has. Sorry, not vote, nominations. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
So, you know, I'm watching all of this unfold, and I'm wondering, decisions are going to have to be made. But part of the narrative that comes through always is collective leadership. We did this together. Now, when you're doing great things, it's a great thing to be on this train. But when things are falling apart, you then get tainted with that. Is this something that is going to follow him going forward, that he has to work really hard to start shedding and saying, well, I was there, but.
Look, I'm not sure if it's going to be such an impact. Yes, he's been in government for the past 5 years. He's also effectively presided over some of, I think, the stalemate issues that the NEC has found itself in. For instance, the issue of why, when there was a clear-cut judgment on the issue of President Jacob Zuma, NEC went back and said, well, the branches must decide what we do with the president. And I think, for me, that showed that the NEC was compromised. And he was there. He presided over those meetings. And certainly, obviously, it's going to be the issue of Marikana. How is he going to deal with that image? So I'm not quite sure if it will be something that will characterize or define if he wins. I don't think that will define his administration. But certainly, he will be able to deal with those things.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is kind of most probably the ANC's strong point, but also the ANC's weak point. And he answered it also when you talked about processes and so on. And sometimes you get paralysis through process, you know, and paralysis through all this talking and subcommittees. And you will see it again on this, you know, few days. It will be the moment there is a sort of really contested issue, they'll go, comrades, let's form a subcommittee and let's defer that. You know, so I think that's more a problem there. Look, I mean, whether you are in the DA or whether you are in the ANC or whether you're in the EFF, at some point in the future you will be told, you know, you were there, you know, and why didn't you? That's politics for you, you know. So I don't think that particularly, and of course the opposition will always attack you for it. So I think yes, of course he will be attacked for it, but will it be, I agree with Tupelo, I don't think it will define him in any way. It's not
life-threatening.
No.
Okay, all right, that's where we're going to leave it. I'm sure we've got lots to talk about because there's enough days for things to unfold. Definitely. And this story that you've just broken for us, that there is this cooperation, will be interesting and will be looked at. But to both of you, Melanie Fafut, Tapelo Tselapedi, thank you very much for joining us and giving us some insightful analysis.
Pleasure.
All right, and that's where we're going to leave it and say goodbye. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll do it again tomorrow, same time, and yeah, see you tomorrow.